Hello to my seventh graders. It's good to see you. This is Pastor Sam, and we've got another lesson in our Ten Commandments unit. Today we'll be talking about the fourth commandment and fifth commandments, and then looking at, again, three passages from the Bible and how those commandments are used. Now, taking you back a little bit, we are going to talk about God's law as a curb, a mirror, and a guide. And I'm going to use the car analogies again. So think about the curb keeps you in the street where your car should be. Now you can jump the curb, you can go beyond what is allowed and run into people and smash houses and kill yourself, right? Those are all bad things that happen when you jump the curb. So stay in the curb. The curb gives us a boundary for what we should be doing. Next up is the mirror. The mirror, think about when you get up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth and trying to get the goo out, doing your hair and whatever else you do in the morning. The mirror shows you how you are, and then that doesn't leave anything to your imagination. You get to see exactly what you look like when you look in the mirror. The mirror is confronting us with the consequences of our choices. That's typically how the mirror is used in God's law, is showing us the results of our typically bad choices. It can, I guess, be used to show us the results of good choices, the consequences of good choices. Typically, we view this in a negative way, and I guess that's something for me to keep in mind for the future, is how we can have a mirror to show us a positive way. Maybe that's something to think about. See, I'm learning new things too. And then the last one is the guide. Think about this as the GPS or guide to get home. If you got into your car and your parents just followed the curb, they only stayed on the road, they would never get home, right? They would never get home because they have no idea where they're going. They're staying on the road, and that's good, but they don't know where they're going, and you're never going to get home. The guide shows us where to go and how to be doing things. This is typically positive phrasing. You should do such and such. You should watch this video. That's a guide thing, telling you what you ought to do. You will need your catechism, if you have it handy. You will need, my Bible's way over there, but I'm cheating. I've got the things printed off. But you should not cheat. Grab your Bible too, even if it's way over there. Grab your Bible and have it open, because we'll be using it. First up, we're in the Catechism on page 81. Today we're going to talk about the fourth and fifth commandments. Here's the fourth commandment. Honor your father and your mother. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. I'll tell you what, I struggled with this one when I was your age. Do I really have to obey my parents? Short answer, yep, you sure do. God put them in your life for a reason. You are not randomly and accidentally given to your parents. Ooh, that was easy. Now, if your parents should ask you to do something that's obviously against God's word, like killing someone, then no, you don't listen to them. But don't be stupid. They're not going to do something like that. Listen to your parents. Darn it. All right. Now, I get to talk about God's authority. God's authority. Imagine if God were here among us and he could tell us exactly what to do every day. We would listen to him and do what he's telling us because he's God. Dang it. But he's not here. He's not here. Although he has given us a way that we can hear him faintly even now, and that is the concept of authority. Things like parents, things like the government, things like churches and schools. These are ways that God trickles down his authority to you. And God does not place people in these places lightly or randomly. He does it with great thought and intention. Have you ever considered why you weren't born 500 or 1,000 years ago, or why you're born now as opposed to like 10,000 years into the future? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about why you were born to your parents in particular and not to your neighbors? Have you ever thought? I thought about that for a little bit. Didn't really have any answers because I don't think there are answers. God just does what he thinks is best for us. But he has put you specifically now in your family, in Pierre, as opposed to anywhere else in any other time that he could have made you to be born. He did it right here and now. So listen to your parents, all right? And your pastors and your school teachers and the government. They are there to tell you what God thinks. The government is there to keep the peace and safety of the people, right? Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be times where parents and pastors and government mess up, because we're just people too. That is not an excuse to ignore us. You can reveal to us those times where we have strayed, and you can function as a type of authority in that way, right? If there are times where your parents may have been in error, discuss it calmly with them, with no eye rolls, with no raising of voice. Discuss it calmly. Good. Got the tough one out of the way. Just kidding. The next one's tough too. Fifth commandment, page 85. You shall not murder. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need. I told you this one was tough, and it is. But you probably think, I've never murdered anyone. I got this one down. But you would be wrong. You would be dead wrong. Jesus extends this commandment to our thoughts. Have you ever had an angry thought, like when your brother or sister has taken something from you, or when your parents are asking you to do something and you're all like not wanting to do it, and you've been angry? Have you ever been angry? Then you, like me, are a murderer. You murderous seventh graders. It's a tough commandment, all right? Because it goes into, if we're angry, Jesus says that is like murdering someone. If we're angry against them, we have murdered them. So this one's tough too. We got two tough commandments today. There's nothing I can do about it. That's what God says, so I just tell you what he says. All right, on to the second half of the lesson. We're going to look at 3 passages from the Bible, and we're going to talk about our curb, mirror, and guide thingies. First up, Genesis chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. Now you can pause these videos to find what you need in the Bible, and then boop, play them when you're ready. Genesis 4, 8 through 10. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." Now this one, I think, is one of the most obvious readings we have as far as which of the 3 it is. I think this one is pretty clearly the mirror. Cain kills his brother Abel, and God, I guess, comes down. There's not a lot of detail to picture the story, but God talks to Cain, and he's like, "Where's Abel?" And Cain's like, "I don't know." Lying to God. And God's like, "You killed him." Right? And Cain is confronted with the consequence of his choice. And then God, if you keep reading a little bit, God disciplines Cain. He punishes Cain for killing his brother. So this one's a mirror. I don't think there's a lot of a curb or guiding to it. I think this one is mostly mirror. Next up, Genesis 22, 1 through 14. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them, together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Now this is a difficult reading. Think back to what I said earlier about if your parents told you to kill someone, you should listen to God. Well, what if God is telling you to kill someone? Now, as a side note, God's not going to tell you to kill anyone, so don't be stupid. But here, God is telling Abraham to kill his son. That's crazy. It's crazy. Abraham listens to God, and as we have heard the story and know the ending, Abraham doesn't actually have to go through with it. God is concerned with the intention of Abraham's heart. And so I think this gives us a guide. A guide is probably the strongest of the three, that Abraham is listening to an authority. I think this is kind of a 4th commandment one is a little closer, although obviously murder brings it into the 5th commandment. Abraham gives us a guide that he is listening to God and doing as God has told him. Now that does kind of harken back to the 1st commandment, but you're just bringing up all kinds of objections that I wish you wouldn't. Abraham is showing us that we listen to those in authority, especially when they're God. Now, this also is a mirror, and as I kind of said earlier in the video, I think this is maybe a positive mirror, where because Abraham is listening to God and doing what God has said, God provides a ram. So Abraham has got the wood and the fire and the knife and everything ready to go for the sacrifice, and he doesn't have to sacrifice his son Isaac. God gives him a ram instead. This one could be mirror too. It's giving this time a positive outcome of what happens when we listen to God and those God has put in authority, that things kind of go more or less well, right? We keep the law and things are cool. All right, on to the 3rd one. From Luke chapter 15, 11 through 32. And he, Jesus, said, There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. I really like this parable that Jesus tells. I say this so often that it kind of loses meaning. It's one of my favorite parables, and I'll probably say that about like every parable that I read, because they're all my favorites. But I think this is one of my favorites. Now this one, I think, is actually all three types, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. I think this shows us all three different types. Okay, first of all, we've got the curb. Now towards the end of the story, when the older brother is coming in from the field and his father has gone out to talk to him, the older brother provides us with those boundaries. He tells us what a child should do in relation to their parent. Okay, verse 29. I'm going to go back to verse 29. But he, the older brother, answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. He's telling his father, like, look, I have been within the curb. I have not once gone out from what you have told me to do. I think there's some curb in this story. The older brother is showing us what it means to keep the fourth commandment. Now, earlier in the story, I think there is also some mirror. I think mirror is going on kind of throughout this story as people are faced with the consequences of their choices. I think one of the clearest examples comes early in the story, verses 16 through 17. And he, the younger brother, was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger. With hunger. The younger brother is realizing the consequence of his choice. He has chosen to, how do I say it? Humiliate his father in a way when he asks for the inheritance. The inheritance only comes when someone is dead. The younger brother, is essentially saying to his father, I would rather have the money I'm going to get when you die than have you be still here. In a way, there is murdering going on in that statement, that the younger brother says, I wish you were dead so that I could receive your money. And then the younger brother goes out and he wastes it. And then he's faced with that consequence. And that's, I think, the mirror when he realizes to himself, I really screwed up. I really screwed up. He wants to eat pig slop. I've never seen pig slop, but I imagine it's gross, right? I would imagine pig slop is gross. They eat the foods that you and I don't want to eat. So it's gross. It's gross. Okay, there's some mirror going on in this story. And I think there's also guide. I think there's guide going on. Now I'm hesitant to even call it the end of the story. At the end of the section, at the end of the reading, the story doesn't have an ending. It doesn't have an ending. And I think that lack of ending is the guide. The father has come out and he's talking to the older brother, and the older brother is angry because the older brother has been following what the father says, and the older brother feels like he should have some reward for that. And the father says that what I'm doing, what the father is doing, is correct and reasonable, and here's why. And then the story just ends. It ends. We don't know what the older brother decides to do. Is he all angry and upset and storms off and rolls his eyes, that younger brother, and off he goes? Or does he recognize the goodness that he has from his father, and in humility enters the party to celebrate the life of his younger brother? Those are kind of the two choices. And the guiding aspect of it is, older brother, don't be so stupid, right? Just go into the party. Go into that I think, and it's so genius. Obviously what Jesus does is genius. It's so genius what he does by leaving off the ending of the story. It's telling us, don't be stupid. This is what you should do. This is the guide, how we live as children to our parents. Here's what you older brother should do. And really, we're just pointing the finger back at ourselves, because we're like, here's what I should be doing as a son and daughter. It's just, it's so cool. I think all three, look at that. We did it. We had a reading where all three were used. All three. We've gone through some tricky commandments. Fourth commandment is just, it stays tough all your life. It doesn't get any easier. Because then as you get older and you have kids, you're on the other side of it and you're like, kids, listen to me. And then the fifth commandment, those angry thoughts, man, they pop up all the time. All the time there are angry thoughts. Like, people do stuff to us all day long, and it's so easy to be angry with them. These are tough, tough commandments to keep. They're tough. When you mess up, like when I mess up, pray to God, ask for forgiveness, ask mom and dad for forgiveness. God will give it to you. I think your parents will too. I think they will. All right. Got another lesson on the books. I hope that you have learned from this. I almost said enjoyed. I'm not quite so concerned with your enjoyment. I am concerned with you learning about God. I am also interested in you enjoying these, and I hope that they have been at least a teensy bit enjoyable. I hope so. We will come back next week and we will look at, I think, the 6th and 7th commandments. 6th and 7th. So stay tuned. It's good to see you guys. And I will see you next week.